It was a quiet day in the galaxy when the first reports began to flood in. The Andromean Empire, the most powerful and ruthless force in the known universe, had set its sights on a small, insignificant planet. The world, Earth, was a speck in the cosmic expanse, a place no one had ever thought worthy of attention. Yet, now, in the year 3087, it was about to become the focal point of a galactic conflict that would change everything. The Andromean Armada, a fleet of colossal ships capable of destroying entire worlds, had been mobilized, and they were on their way. Hundreds of thousands of warships, each more formidable than anything any other species had ever seen, were heading toward Earth. With their hyper-intelligent battle systems and invincible technology, the Andromeans had conquered thousands of planets and wiped out anyone who dared stand against them. They were unstoppable, invulnerable, and had no qualms about obliterating entire civilizations. As the fleet approached Earth's orbit, the galaxy held its breath. The Andromeans made no attempt at diplomacy or negotiation. Their message was simple, clear, and terrifying: Earth was a prize they intended to claim. The human race, they declared, would either submit or face extinction. But there was one thing the Andromeans hadn't accounted for. One detail they had missed. A single human. Major Jackson Reed, a decorated war hero, stood on the command deck of the Aegis, Earth's most advanced military vessel. For years, he had fought in countless battles, earned his reputation as a tactician and strategist, but today, none of that mattered. What mattered now was the defense of his home planet, the world that had shaped him, the world he had sworn to protect. His face was calm, but his eyes held a fire, a determination that only a human could carry. The Andromean fleet was massive, filling the horizon like a wall of steel and destruction. The human forces were outmatched. There was no possible way they could win. And yet, as Reed surveyed the endless expanse of enemy ships, he couldn't help but smile. He knew something they didn't. "Prepare the Eagle Strike," he ordered, his voice firm yet oddly calm. "We're going to give them a welcome they won't forget." His crew exchanged puzzled glances. The Eagle Strike was a classified project, something only a handful of people knew about. A weapon so powerful it could potentially change the course of history. But no one had ever dared use it before. It was too dangerous. Too risky. Reed didn't care. His gaze never left the enormous Andromean flagship at the head of the fleet. It was the size of a city, a floating fortress surrounded by thousands of smaller ships. Reed knew that no one had ever survived an attack from the Andromeans. But he had something they didn't, an innate human quality. One that could never be calculated or predicted by cold, alien logic. He'd spent years studying the Andromeans, learning their weaknesses, understanding their technology. He knew their AI systems could predict movements and counter strategies with chilling precision, but there was one thing they couldn't predict: the unpredictability of humanity. "Eagle Strike is ready," the voice of his weapons officer echoed from the control panel. "Launching in 3, 2. Reed didn't wait for the countdown to finish. He slammed his fist on the activation button, and the massive weapon, a sleek, stealthy missile equipped with a quantum detonator, launched toward the Andromean flagship. The missile was a marvel of human ingenuity. Capable of bypassing even the most sophisticated shields, it would send a shockwave of energy across the fleet, disrupting their systems long enough to give the humans a fighting chance. The entire command deck fell silent as they watched the missile race toward its target. In a matter of seconds, it would either be intercepted by the enemy's defenses or succeed in its mission. The seconds dragged on like hours. Then, just as the missile approached the flagship, a sudden flash of light erupted in space. The Andromean flagship's shields flared up, a fierce attempt to block the incoming attack. But it wasn't enough. The missile pierced the shields, its quantum charge exploding with the force of 100 nuclear warheads. The shockwave sent ripples through space, temporarily disabling the Andromean fleet's ability to communicate and coordinate. For the first time in centuries, the Andromeans found themselves caught off guard, vulnerable. Major Reed stood, watching the chaos unfold on the display. The Andromean fleet was reeling, their systems scrambled by the blast. This was the moment. The galaxy had always feared the Andromeans. They had ruled with an iron fist, unstoppable and all-powerful. But now, as the human missile struck their greatest vessel, something deep in the hearts of every Andromean officer and soldier began to stir. They weren't the only ones who could fight back. The universe, for the first time in its long history, began to understand why humanity was feared. The blast from the Eagle strike left the Andromean fleet reeling, but the aftermath was only the beginning of the chaos that was about to unfold. The immense shockwave had sent a ripple through the enemy's highly advanced fleet, temporarily disabling their communication systems and triggering a massive cascade failure in their battle networks. For the first time in centuries, the Andromeans were no longer in complete control. The Aegis, the human flagship, was now on the front lines of a battle that had turned unexpectedly in their favor. As Major Jackson Reed stood in the command center, the hum of the ship's systems returned to life after the initial shock. His crew exchanged quick glances of disbelief. I can't believe it worked," Lieutenant Vera, his tactical officer, said, her voice filled with astonishment. "We actually hit them." Reed remained focused, his hands steady on the controls. "This is far from over. We have one chance, and we're not going to waste it. Prepare the fleet for engagement." Around them, the Earth's remaining defense forces had begun to rally, spurred by the success of the missile strike. The human fleet, though outnumbered and technologically inferior to the Andromean Armada, was now in the fight of its life. Every vessel that hadn't been completely crippled by the initial blast had rallied behind the Aegis, and together, they began their charge into the heart of the Andromean formation. The Andromeans had not been caught completely off guard. As their systems rebooted, the fleet quickly adapted to the disruption, but it would take time. The human strike had bought them valuable moments that would prove critical in the ensuing battle. As the Aegis powered forward, Reed's mind raced. He had studied the Andromeans for years, dissecting every battle report and technological analysis he could find. He knew their strengths and weaknesses better than most. The Andromeans, with all their cold, calculating logic and precision, lacked something essential that humans had in abundance: their ability to improvise and adapt on the fly. "They think they've got us," Reed muttered under his breath, "but they're about to find out just how dangerous we are." Aboard the Andromean flagship, Emperor Jorith Vorn's expression darkened as he observed the situation. His fleet had never experienced such resistance. His military genius had led the Andromean Empire to countless victories, but he had never faced an enemy like this before. Earth was supposed to be a simple conquest, a minor mission in his empire's endless expansion. His tactical officers scrambled to analyze the new threat. "Your Excellency," one officer said, "the humans are engaging us head-on. Their strategy seems unorthodox. We are having difficulty calculating their next moves." "Unorthodox?" Jorith sneered. "They are humans. They have no strategy. No coordination. We will crush them like we have crushed all other species before them." But the Emperor's words lacked conviction. His mind raced as he watched the human forces push forward, undeterred by the overwhelming odds. This wasn't like any other encounter. These humans were proving themselves to be far more than just the prey he had anticipated. Jorith, known for his arrogance, had underestimated humanity's sheer will to survive. He underestimated their creativity, their resilience, their hunger to defend their home. On the battlefield, Reed knew that every second counted. He had been given an unexpected opening, but he couldn't afford to waste it. "Lock onto their flagship," Reed ordered. "Prepare for a full assault. I want to make sure they know exactly who they're dealing with." Reed's decision was bold, but it was the only one that made sense. The Andromean flagship, now vulnerable after the initial blast, was the heart of their entire operation. Destroying it would cripple their fleet and buy Earth more time. The battle that was unfolding was not just a fight for survival, it was a statement. Humanity would no longer kneel to the oppression of the Andromean Empire. They would fight back, and they would fight to win. The Aegis' engines roared as it surged forward into the heart of the enemy fleet. As Reed commanded, a barrage of laser fire and plasma missiles erupted from the human vessels, carving through the Andromean defenses. The Aegis herself was a heavily armored ship, a testament to human engineering, but the enemy's firepower was still staggering. Shields flickered under the barrage, and sparks flew across the deck as the ship's hull took a few heavy hits. Yet, the crew kept their cool, knowing that this was a fight for their very survival. Reed gripped the command chair tighter, his mind working quickly to calculate the next step. They had caught the Andromeans off guard, but they would need every advantage they could get to win. He needed to keep them guessing. Keep them on the edge. "We can do this," he whispered to himself, just as the flagship's massive guns began to fire on the Aegis. They would have to rely on everything they had, human ingenuity, heart, and spirit, to turn the tide of this battle. They had one chance. And it would be their defining moment. The galaxy was watching. The Andromean Empire, for all its might, was about to learn why humanity was feared. And it would be a lesson they would never forget. The Aegis shook violently as the Andromean flagship's massive energy blasts hit their mark. Sparks danced across the command deck, and the flashing lights cast an eerie glow over the crew. But Major Reed's focus never wavered. His hands moved quickly across the console, navigating the chaotic battlefield with cold precision. The human fleet had turned the tide, but they were still vastly outnumbered, and the Andromeans were nothing if not relentless. "Status report." Reed barked as the ship's alarms screamed across the comms. "We're holding steady, sir," Lieutenant Vera said, her voice tight with strain. "Shields are down to 30%, and we're taking on some hull damage, but we can still maneuver." Reed nodded sharply, his mind running over their dwindling options. The Aegis was one of the most advanced ships in the human fleet, but it was still just a single vessel facing down an entire armada. They had struck the first blow, yes, but the battle was far from over. The Andromeans were regrouping, and their counterattack was beginning. Meanwhile, on the Andromean flagship, Emperor Joreth Vorn paced restlessly in his command center. The unexpected assault had rattled him more than he cared to admit. His finest warships, some of the most advanced military vessels in the galaxy, were struggling to maintain order. His fleet was in disarray, the once perfectly coordinated forces thrown into confusion by the humans' unrelenting assault. "They are not acting like any species we've encountered before," Joreth muttered. His voice was low, yet filled with frustration. "Their unpredictability is maddening." His chief strategist, General Kren, stood before him, trying to mask her own unease. "Emperor, I recommend a strategic retreat. We can regroup and strike again once our systems are fully operational. The humans are relentless, but they have no chance of defeating our fleet." Joreth scowled, his eyes narrowing as he stared out at the chaos unfolding on the battlefield. "Retreat? We do not retreat. We crush our enemies. We have been unstoppable for millennia, and this planet will fall, just like all the others before it." Kren hesitated, her eyes darting to the large tactical display where Earth's defenses were proving more formidable than expected. The human forces were pushing forward with a fervor, each ship piloted by crews who were willing to die to protect their home. She'd seen this before: species driven by desperation, by sheer survival instinct, could be the most dangerous of all. "I'll increase our efforts to counter their weapons," Kren said. "But you must understand, the humans are not acting according to any known strategy. We must be cautious." "I will not be cautious," Joreth snapped. "They will learn that resistance is futile." As the Andromeans steeled themselves for what they believed was a momentary setback, Reed's mind was already several steps ahead. He had no illusions about the difficulty of this fight, but he also understood something that the Andromeans hadn't yet grasped. The humans had something the Andromeans couldn't replicate: the ability to push beyond limits, to adapt and innovate in real time. "Bring us in closer," Reed ordered. "Target their vulnerable points. We need to strike their command systems, disrupt their fleet coordination before they can recover." Vera's eyes flicked over the tactical readouts. "Closer? We're already in range for direct fire. If we move in any closer, will be sitting ducks for their secondary defenses. Reed didn't flinch. We move in closer. We need to keep them guessing. If they can't predict our moves, they can't counter them. Despite the risk, Vera complied, setting the Aegis on a bold, unpredictable course. As they advanced toward the Andromean flagship, every human vessel followed suit, moving with unmatched coordination, each ship's movements designed to confuse the Andromean targeting systems. In space, there was no room for hesitation. The distance between the Aegis and the Andromean flagship closed rapidly, the tension palpable among the crew. "All hands, brace for impact," came the loud announcement over the ship's intercom. The final assault was beginning, and there would be no turning back. In the heart of the Andromean fleet, General Kren watched with growing concern. "They're closing in too fast. I can't adjust our strategy quickly enough to counter them. They won't be able to breach our defenses," Joreth insisted, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed his doubt. "Focus all firepower on the human flagship." But it was already too late. The humans had anticipated their every move, exploiting every tiny weakness in the Andromean defenses. "Now!" Reed shouted as the Aegis' weapon systems activated. The concentrated fire from the human fleet rained down upon the Andromean flagship, targeting its critical power conduits and weapon systems. The Andromean flagship shuddered under the assault, its shields flickering under pressure. Reed could see the damage building on the tactical display. This wasn't just a simple strike, this was a devastating blow. "Direct hit to their primary reactor," Vera reported. "They're beginning to lose power in multiple sectors. Their counteroffensive is weakening." Reed's eyes remained locked on the view screen. For a brief moment, it felt as though the universe had frozen. He could feel the weight of history in this single moment, the realization that humanity was not merely surviving, they were thriving. The Aegis and her fleet were the embodiment of human defiance, of a species that had faced impossible odds time and time again, and always found a way to rise above them. In the silence of space, Joreth Vorn's voice came through the communications channels, his words cold with fury. "You have made a grave mistake, humans. Do you truly think you can defeat us? We will tear your fleet apart. We will destroy your planet. And then we will make you watch as we burn your home to ash." But the truth was, the Andromeans had underestimated the human spirit. They didn't yet know that even if Earth burned, humanity would rise from the ashes, and they would remember the name Reed forever. The humans were no longer a species to be ignored. And now, the galaxy was watching. The Aegis surged forward, undeterred by the growing waves of Andromean fire. The shields were weakening, the hull was taking more hits than ever before, but Major Reed's resolve never faltered. His crew had become extensions of himself in these moments. Each man and woman on the bridge knew what was at stake. They could feel the weight of humanity's survival in every calculated move. "Shields are down to 20%. Lieutenant Vera's voice rang out across the command deck, but there was no panic in it, just the calm precision that Reed had trained her for. "We can't take much more of this." "We don't need to," Reed replied, his tone grim but determined. "Prepare the secondary strike force. We're going in." His decision was bold, and it could very well be suicidal. The human fleet was still outnumbered by a vast margin. The Andromeans, despite their growing instability, were more than capable of overwhelming any isolated human vessel. But Reed knew they didn't have the luxury of playing it safe. The Andromeans had learned to fear humanity's resilience, but it was time to show them just how deep that well of defiance ran. The human ships, each one battered and scarred by the battle, regrouped. Despite the immense odds, they moved as one, an unwavering wall of determination, each vessel acting with the unspoken coordination that only humanity's ingenuity could bring to bear. "Launch the secondary strike force," Reed ordered. "We're going to give them everything we've got." In the heart of the Andromean fleet, Emperor Joreth Vorn stood at the helm of his flagship, watching the unfolding chaos with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The humans, those insignificant creatures from an insignificant world, had outsmarted him. They had somehow turned the tide of a battle that should have been a routine conquest. "No more hesitation," Jorith growled, his fists clenched in fury. Activate the full might of the fleet. Destroy them. All of them. His commanders scrambled to comply, but Jorith's orders were tinged with a desperation he hadn't experienced in centuries. The Andromean Empire was vast, untouchable, and had crushed countless species, yet these humans were proving to be an anomaly, one he couldn't fathom, one he couldn't predict. This will be our victory, Jorith muttered to himself. It must be. Meanwhile, Reed's mind raced, calculating their next steps. The Aegis was nearing its breaking point, its shields almost gone, its weapons systems strained from the relentless offensive. Yet, the strike force he'd ordered was his last, best chance. The Andromeans were floundering in their efforts to retaliate, their once dominant fleet had been scattered, their communications scrambled. Reed's hand clenched the edge of the control panel. Now, he whispered. At that moment, the human fleet launched their final assault, a coordinated barrage of missiles, drones, and pulse fire. Each human ship deployed their final weapon, a series of highly sophisticated, hyper-intelligent drones that could adapt on the fly, learning the Andromean movements in real time. They weren't just weapons, they were a reflection of humanity's greatest asset, its ability to innovate, to evolve, and to fight with a resourcefulness that no enemy could predict. The drones swarmed through the Andromean formations, dodging fire with near-superhuman precision, weaving in and out of enemy defenses like phantoms. They targeted weak points on the Andromean ships, vital power conduits, shield generators, engine cores, and struck without mercy. The Andromean fleet faltered as their advanced technology, once impervious, began to fail. The once unshakable Andromeans were now overwhelmed by the ingenuity of their prey. What is this? General Kren's voice crackled over the comms. Her eyes widened as she watched the scene unfold. The drones, they're adapting. They're responding faster than our systems can compensate. We can't stop them. This is impossible, the officer next to her stammered. How can they do this? How are they doing this? The sheer scale of the disruption was enough to send ripples of panic through the Andromean command. Their once perfect coordination began to unravel. Ships collided in the chaos. Some tried to retreat, others attempted to regroup, but every move they made was countered by the relentless precision of the human forces. On the Aegis, Reed saw the effects of their final assault in real time. The Andromeans were stumbling, their massive warships now vulnerable, their systems completely out of sync. This was the moment he had been waiting for. This was humanity's turning point. Keep the pressure up, Reed ordered. We don't stop until they break. Focus everything on their flagship. The Aegis moved forward, weapons blazing, as it locked onto the Andromean flagship. The energy output of the Aegis' main cannon lit up the void of space, firing one final, decisive shot directly at the heart of the enemy ship. It struck. The blast tore through the Andromean flagship's weakened defenses, exploding with devastating force. The flagship, the symbol of their empire, staggered under the assault. Its engines sputtered, and fires erupted across its surface. We've breached their flagship. Vera shouted, her voice shaking with a mix of triumph and disbelief. It's going down. Jorith Vorn, watching from the command center, felt the floor tremble beneath his feet. His eyes widened in horror as his flagship began to crumble, his empire's heart disintegrating under the relentless power of human might. This cannot be happening, Jorith hissed. Not like this. We are invincible. But the reality of the situation set in. The Andromeans, for all their technological superiority, were now the ones on the retreat. Their forces were broken, scattered, and in complete disarray. The humans, once thought insignificant, had delivered a blow from which the Andromeans could never recover. For Major Reed, the battle wasn't over yet, but a wave of satisfaction washed over him. They had turned the tide, not just for Earth, but for the entire galaxy. Humanity was no longer a species to be ignored. No longer a footnote in the history of the cosmos. They had proven themselves, not just as survivors, but as fierce warriors in their own right. And now, the galaxy was beginning to understand why humanity was feared. The Andromean flagship, once a symbol of imperial might, now hung broken in space, its shattered remains drifting helplessly as the void swallowed what was left of it. Major Reed stood at the helm of the Aegis, his hands steady on the controls, but his mind was racing. The battle had turned in their favor, but there was a price to pay. "Status report," Reed ordered, his voice a calm contrast to the chaos around him. "All human ships are reporting significant damage, sir," Vera replied, her voice strained. "We've lost at least 20% of our fleet, and repairs are ongoing. Shields are offline, and we've sustained heavy casualties across several ships. But, we've won." The weight of victory hung heavily in the air. Yes, the Andromean Empire had been defeated, its flagship destroyed, its fleet scattered, but the cost was staggering. Human losses were deep, and Earth had borne the brunt of the fight. Reed's heart tightened as he thought of the families who would never see their loved ones again, the cities still recovering from the initial bombardment, and the countless ships that had been reduced to debris. "Prepare a message for Earth Command," Reed said, his voice taking on a somber tone. "We need to begin recovery operations immediately. And we need to honor the sacrifices of our fallen." As the crew worked in silence, processing the toll the battle had taken, Reed turned to the viewscreen. The sight of the Andromean fleet in disarray was a bittersweet victory. The humans had not just survived, they had overcome the seemingly insurmountable odds. But the battle had been a brutal reminder that the universe was not a place where mercy was given, and humanity had only just begun to realize the true cost of their defiance. Back in the Andromean Command Center, Emperor Jorith Vorn stood amidst the wreckage of his empire's finest fleet. The once pristine hallways of the flagship were now littered with debris, the once mighty command center a shell of its former self. The Emperor's eyes were wild, his body trembling with a mix of disbelief and rage. "This cannot be happening," Jorith muttered under his breath. "We were invincible. I will not be defeated by these monkeys." General Kren, standing nearby, had her arms crossed as she observed the damage. Her expression was unreadable, but there was an unmistakable weariness in her eyes. The defeat was undeniable, and the Andromeans had no one to blame but themselves. "We underestimated them," Kren said softly. "We didn't anticipate how relentless they would be. They don't fight like anyone else." Jorith snapped his gaze toward her. "Relentless? These humans have no honor, no discipline. How could they have won?" Kren's eyes softened, but she remained silent. She knew there was no answer to give. The Emperor's arrogance had led them all into this disaster. Humanity's unpredictability, their innovation, had shattered everything the Andromeans had thought they knew about war. "They fought with everything they had," Kren said. "They don't surrender. They don't back down. That's why they won." Joritha's expression twisted with a mix of disbelief and growing hatred. "No. They only won because they caught us off guard. It will not happen again." He turned sharply, signaling the remaining command staff to prepare for a counterattack. His voice was cold with fury, and yet, underneath it, there was a trace of fear. Fear that humanity had shown them that even the mightiest empire in the galaxy could be brought to its knees. Meanwhile, the humans had already begun to regroup. The initial victory was nothing more than the first step in a longer, harder battle. They knew the Andromeans would return, they always returned. And the galaxy had only begun to understand the depths of human resilience. Back on Earth, President Elena Michaels watched the battle from her command center, the silence on the comms heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. Earth had won, for now, but the war was far from over. "Mr. President," her advisor, General Lawson, spoke softly beside her, "we've secured the outer defense perimeter, but there are still pockets of Andromean forces in the system. They've retreated to their homeworld, but they're not finished. We need to prepare for what comes next." Michael's face was stoic as she considered his words. Humanity had fought with everything it had, but she knew the true challenge was still ahead. The Andromeans would regroup. They would rebuild. And when they came back, they would be stronger, more determined to crush humanity under their boot. "We can't afford to relax," she said, her voice firm. "Get every available resource into our defense networks." This was only the first battle. As President Michaels spoke, Reed was already on his way to Earth. The Aegis was battered but still operational, and the crew was working tirelessly to repair the ship. But Reed knew it would take more than technology to win this war. It would take the same spirit that had carried them through this first victory. The human race had shown its teeth, had shown that it could strike fear into even the most powerful of empires. And now, with the first victory under their belts, it was time to face the consequences. The universe was watching. The Andromeans had learned a bitter lesson, but the battle for the future was far from over. Humans had shown the galaxy that they were not to be underestimated. The true cost of their victory had only begun to sink in, because the Andromeans weren't finished, and neither were the humans. As Reed looked out at the stars, the realization hit him harder than any explosion had. This war was far from over, but humanity would fight for its place in the cosmos, no matter the cost. The human fleet was battered but resolute. The victory against the Andromean Armada had been costly, but the true toll would only be realized as they prepared for the inevitable counterattack. The Andromeans had retreated to their homeworld, regrouping and licking their wounds, but Major Reed knew better than to think they would leave humanity in peace. The Andromeans didn't know how to lose, not yet. But they would. Back at Earth Command, President Elena Michaels convened a meeting of the planet's top military and scientific leaders. The room was tense as they sat around the large, holographic display that showed the remnants of the Andromean fleet. Despite the victory, there was no joy in the air, only the cold realization of what was to come. "General Lawson, what do we know about the Andromean fleet's status?" President Michaels asked, her voice firm but laced with concern. "We know they're retreating to their homeworld," Lawson replied, his hands hovering over the map as he zoomed in on the Andromean sector. "They've sent out distress signals to their remaining outposts across the galaxy, and they're preparing to rebuild. The fleet will be back. They'll come for Earth again, and this time, we may not be so lucky." Reed's thoughts echoed in his mind as he sat in a quiet corner of the command center. He had been part of the victory, but even he knew the Andromeans would not back down easily. Their pride had been wounded, and wounded pride was always more dangerous than arrogance. He wasn't wrong. The Andromeans had begun their preparations in earnest. Their homeworld was a fortress, and every resource they had would go into making sure they could crush the humans once and for all. This would not be a simple matter of regrouping. They would build a weapon, a force so overwhelming that even humanity's creativity and innovation might not be enough to survive it. Jorith Vorn, now on his homeworld, stood before a massive war council. His hands trembled, not from weakness but from the anger that had consumed him since the failure of his fleet. The human victory had ignited something dark within him, something he had never truly felt before: fear. "We underestimated them," Jorith said, his voice cold but sharp. "They fight like no other species we've encountered. But that ends now." The gathered generals and engineers nodded, their faces a mixture of determination and fear. They all knew the gravity of the situation. The Andromeans had been humiliated, and their empire had been shaken to its core. They couldn't afford another defeat. Not with their position in the galaxy at risk. "We have the technology," Jorith continued. "We have the resources. We will construct a weapon that will wipe them out completely. The humans' creativity, their unpredictability, it's their greatest strength. But it will be their downfall. We will build a weapon that is beyond anything they can comprehend." He turned to his chief engineer, a towering Andromean named Malara, whose reputation for innovation was second to none. "Malara, I want you to build me something that will ensure humanity's destruction. No more playing around. We will crush them completely." Malara nodded, her eyes burning with a fervor that matched the Emperor's. "It will be done, Your Majesty." Meanwhile, on Earth, Major Reed was facing his own dark reality. He stood in a quiet room, staring at the display showing the path of the retreating Andromean forces. His mind raced as he thought about the fight ahead. The Andromeans were going to come back, stronger than before. But they had no idea what they were dealing with. "You're thinking about the future," Vera's voice broke through his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, her expression filled with equal parts concern and resolve. "And it's eating at you, isn't it?" Reed didn't turn around, but he nodded. "I've been through enough wars to know this isn't over. This was just the first round. The Andromeans will be back with everything they've got. They'll rebuild, and they'll come for us with more than just their fleets. They'll come for our souls." Vera walked up beside him, her gaze hardening as she looked at the screen. "Then we'll do what we do best. We fight. We survive. We adapt." Reed finally turned to face her. His expression was grim, but there was fire in his eyes. "This isn't just about surviving anymore. It's about making sure they understand. We are the ones who will dictate the terms of this war. They can't just break us. We're not some primitive species they can wipe out with a fleet. If they want Earth, they'll have to fight for every inch of it." Vera nodded. "And we'll make them regret underestimating us." The meeting at Earth Command continued as Reed and Vera left to prepare for the next phase of humanity's defense. They couldn't afford to let the Andromeans regroup in peace. Every human, from the highest generals to the lowest civilians, knew what was at stake. This was no longer just a fight for survival, it was a fight for their place in the galaxy. And they would not be taken down without showing the full extent of their strength. As Earth Command strategized, the Andromeans had already begun the construction of their weapon, their plans set into motion by a single, unwavering goal: to eradicate humanity. But what they didn't understand, what they could never understand, was that humanity didn't fear death. Humanity didn't fear defeat. Because for humans, it was never about just surviving. It was about fighting, adapting, and winning when the odds seemed impossible. And as Reed stared out over the map of Earth, he felt that fire within him rise once more. This wasn't just a battle anymore. It was humanity's last stand. And they were going to make it count. The day of reckoning had arrived. The Andromeans, having constructed their ultimate weapon, had mobilized their full might for one final assault. From Earth's vantage point, the vastness of their armada seemed unstoppable, an unholy force of warships, weapons, and technologies unlike anything humanity had ever faced. They had come to finish what they had started, to wipe Earth from existence. The defense grid around Earth was already in place, but Reed knew that no amount of technology would win this battle. It wasn't the ships, the weapons, or the technology that would secure humanity's future, it was the spirit, the will to survive, to fight when all hope seemed lost. In the heart of Earth Command, President Elena Michaels stood before a large holographic display, her expression cold but determined. The Andromeans were closing in on Earth's orbit, their massive fleet preparing to launch the final assault. The time for negotiation had long passed. This was war, and it would end today, one way or another. "We've held them off before," General Lawson said, his voice grim but resolute. "But this is different. This weapon they've built, we don't have anything that can stop it." Michael's gaze never wavered from the screen. "We're not going to stop it. We're going to destroy it." Reed, now commanding the Aegis once more, stood on the bridge, the weight of the impending battle heavy in his chest. He watched the approach of the Andromean fleet, his hands steady on the controls, but his mind racing. The Aegis was nearly out of ammunition, its hull battered and scarred. The humans had given everything they had in this fight, but Reed knew this was their last chance. "This is it," he muttered under his breath. "We either win, or we're gone." Vera was at his side, her face set with grim determination. "We're not going down today, Major. Not while we still have breath in our lungs." The Andromeans had underestimated humanity before, and that had cost them dearly. Now, with their ultimate weapon ready, they believed they would be victorious. But humanity had something the Andromeans couldn't fathom, a willingness to sacrifice everything for the chance to live, to fight, and to defy all odds. As the Andromean fleet entered firing range, the first volleys of energy blasts struck the outer defense grid. The shields flared, holding for the moment, but it was clear that they wouldn't last much longer. The Andromeans' weapon, a massive construct that had taken years to develop, was unlike anything the humans had ever faced, a device capable of decimating entire planets with a single blast. It was their ultimate solution to the human problem, and they were eager to use it. But Reed wasn't about to let that happen. "We don't have much time," Vera said, her voice cutting through Reed's thoughts. "That weapon will be operational in less than an hour. We need to disable it before it can fire." "I know," Reed replied, his tone hardening. "We've trained for this. Now we fight like we've never fought before." The Aegis shot forward, the last of its firepower discharging at the Andromean ships in a desperate attempt to slow their advance. But Reed knew that their real target wasn't the fleet, it was the weapon itself. The Andromeans would keep their fleet in orbit around the device, making any direct assault impossible. But there was one way in. "We're going in," Reed ordered. "Full speed ahead, all hands on deck. Prepare for a hell of a fight." The Aegis streaked across the battlefield, weaving in and out of enemy fire, taking damage but pressing forward. Reed's crew fought as one, pilots, engineers, and soldiers alike, each playing their part in this final mission. The Andromean fleet was fierce, but it was clear they had underestimated the humans' ability to adapt, to think beyond the obvious. The Aegis made its way to the heart of the Andromean Armada, its weapons blazing as it carved a path toward the weapon's location. The Andromeans, caught off guard by the audacity of the human assault, scrambled to regroup and retaliate. But it was too late. Reed's eyes locked onto the massive Andromean device, now in view. It was larger than anything he had ever seen, an immense tower of dark metal and pulsating energy. It was protected by an unyielding shield, but Reed knew that there was always a way in. Humanity had never been defeated by strength alone, they had won with creativity, with their ability to think outside the box. "Vera, get me the firing coordinates for the Aegis' main cannon," Reed ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. Vera worked quickly, her fingers flying over the console. "Firing solution in 5 seconds, Major." Reed's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the Andromean fleet closing in, but he held firm. "Just 5 seconds." As the Aegis prepared to fire its final shot, Reed spoke the words that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. "For Earth. For every single one of us." The cannon fired, a blinding beam of energy racing toward the Andromean weapon. It struck with pinpoint precision, breaking through the shield and hitting the core of the device. The explosion was unlike anything humanity had ever seen, an inferno of energy and fire that ripped through the Andromean weapon, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. The Andromean fleet, stunned and disoriented, faltered in its response. Their weapon, the key to their victory, was gone. Without it, their ships were no match for the humans' relentless will to fight. Reed and his crew knew this battle was over. The Andromeans, broken and retreating, had no choice but to flee. Humanity had survived, again. But as Reed watched the Andromean Armada retreat into the depths of space, he couldn't help but feel the weight of what they had all sacrificed. The cost of their victory had been high, far higher than anyone could truly comprehend. Yet humanity had proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they were not to be underestimated. They were not just survivors. They were warriors. As the Aegis sailed back toward Earth, Reed couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them here, the struggles, the pain, the moments of doubt. But in the end, it was all worth it. They had shown the universe what humanity could do. And the galaxy would never forget why humanity was feared.